I knew something was wrong the moment I turned onto Pinecrest Lane that Tuesday morning and saw the steel gate blocking my usual route through the neighborhood access road. My name is Brandon Reeves, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Charlotte, North Carolina for 8 years without a single problem until Patricia Hendricks took over as president of the Homeowners Association 6 months ago. The gate wasn't just any gate. It was a massive wrought iron monstrosity with decorative scrollwork and a heavy-duty padlock that gleamed in the September sunlight. I pulled my truck to a stop and stared at it, my coffee growing cold in the cup holder. This access road wasn't just some random path through the neighborhood. It was a deeded easement that ran along the eastern border of the subdivision, providing direct access from the main highway to my property and 3 other homes that backed up to the easement. Without it, we had to drive an extra 4 miles through winding residential streets to reach our houses. I grabbed my phone and immediately called my neighbor, Greg Martinez, who lived 2 houses down from me. He answered on the second ring, his voice already tense with frustration. "You see it too?" he asked. "I'm sitting right in front of it. What the hell is this?" Patricia sent an email last night at midnight, said the HOA board voted to install a security gate to protect the neighborhood from unauthorized traffic. She claims the easement road has become a public safety hazard. I felt my jaw clench. That's my deeded easement, our deeded easement. She can't just block access to our properties. That's what I told her when I called at 7 this morning. She said we need to submit a written request for gate access codes and that the board will review our applications within 30 days. 30 days? Greg, I need to get to work. My tools are in my garage and I have a job site waiting for me in Gastonia. I owned a small construction business, Reeves Contracting, and missing even a single day could cost me thousands of dollars and damage relationships with clients who depended on me to show up on time. The irony wasn't lost on me that I built structures for a living, and now someone had built a structure specifically to make my life miserable. "I'm already late," Greg said. "I had to turn around and go the long way, hit every bit of morning traffic. Listen, I'm calling my lawyer as soon as I get to the office. This can't be legal." After hanging up with Greg, I sat there for another minute, staring at that gate. I thought about ramming it with my truck, but that would probably get me arrested and definitely wouldn't help my case. Instead, I threw the truck in reverse, backed out onto the highway, and took the long route to my house. What should have been a 5-minute drive turned into 25 minutes of crawling through school zones and stopping at traffic lights. When I finally reached my house, I was 40 minutes behind schedule. My crew was already calling, wondering where I was with the equipment we needed. I loaded up as quickly as I could and headed out, taking the long route again. By the time I reached the job site, I'd wasted nearly 2 hours of my day. That evening, I came home exhausted and furious. I pulled into my driveway the long way again, and as I was getting out of my truck, I noticed Patricia Hendricks herself standing in my front yard with a clipboard. She was exactly what you'd picture when someone says HOA president. Mid-50s, perfectly highlighted blonde hair, styled in that aggressive bob cut that screamed, "I want to speak to the manager," and wearing a white polo shirt with the Meadowbrook Estates logo embroidered on the chest. "Mr. Reeves," she called out in that syrupy, sweet voice that made my skin crawl. "I wanted to personally deliver your violation notice." I walked over to her, my work boots heavy on the concrete. "What violation?" She consulted her clipboard with exaggerated precision. "Your lawn is currently 3.7 inches tall. HOA regulations clearly state that grass cannot exceed 3 inches. You have 72 hours to remedy this situation, or you'll face a fine of $100 per day." I looked at my lawn. It looked perfectly normal. Maybe slightly overdue for a mow, but nothing egregious. "Patricia, my grass has been this length before. Nobody ever said anything." "Well, I'm saying something now. Standards have been slipping in this neighborhood, and it's my job as president to restore order and property values." She smiled, showing too many teeth. "I'm sure you understand." "What I understand is that you installed a gate on my deeded easement without permission. That's illegal, Patricia." Her smile didn't waver. "The board voted unanimously to install that gate for security purposes. The easement road has become a thoroughfare for non-residents cutting through our neighborhood. We've had reports of suspicious vehicles." "Suspicious vehicles? You mean me, Greg, Thomas, and Yolanda driving to our own houses?" "The gate will be staying up." If you'd like access, you need to fill out the appropriate paperwork. I have the forms in my car. I don't need forms to access my own property. That easement is in my deed. I have a legal right to use that road." Patricia's smile finally faded. "The HOA has rights too, Mr. Reeves. That easement runs through HOA managed common areas. We have the authority to regulate access for the safety and security of all residents. Show me the bylaws that say you can block a deeded easement." "I don't have to show you anything. The board has spoken. Now, about your lawn." She tore off a copy of the violation notice and handed it to me. 72 hours. Have a blessed evening." She turned and walked away, her sensible flats clicking on my driveway. I stood there, holding the violation notice, feeling my blood pressure rising. This wasn't just about a gate anymore. This was about control. Patricia had seized power in the HOA and was using it to make everyone's life miserable. And for some reason, she decided to make me her primary target. I went inside and immediately called my lawyer, Robert Chen, who'd handled the closing on my house 8 years ago. He listened to my story and asked me to send him copies of my deed and the HOA bylaws. I spent the next hour digging through my file cabinet, scanning documents, and emailing everything to Robert. He called me back at 9 that night. "Brandon, I've reviewed everything. You're absolutely right. That easement is deeded to you and the 3 other property owners. The HOA has no legal authority to block your access. That gate is illegal." "So what do I do?" "We file an emergency injunction to have it removed. I can have the paperwork ready by tomorrow afternoon. We'll request a hearing for next week." "Next week? Robert, I can't wait that long. Every day I'm losing hours of productivity. I'm missing appointments." "I understand, but the legal system moves slowly. In the meantime, document everything. Take photos, keep records of your extra travel time, save any communication from the HOA. We'll need it for court." I thanked him and hung up, but I couldn't shake the feeling of helplessness. I was being blocked from my own property, forced to waste time and money, all because some power-hungry HOA president decided she could do whatever she wanted. The next morning, I woke up early and drove the long route out of the neighborhood again. As I sat in traffic, I had an idea. When I got home that evening, I went out to my garage and found my heavy-duty bolt cutters. They were industrial grade, the kind we used on job sites to cut through rebar and chain-link fence. I stared at them for a long moment, weighing my options. Robert had said to wait for the legal process, but the legal process could take weeks, maybe months if Patricia dragged it out. In the meantime, I was the one suffering. My business was suffering. And technically, if the easement was legally mine, wasn't I just removing an illegal obstruction from my property? I made my decision. The next morning, I loaded the bolt cutters into my truck and drove to the gate. It was 6 in the morning, early enough that most of the neighborhood was still asleep. I got out, walked up to the gate, and examined the lock. It was substantial, but nothing my cutters couldn't handle. I positioned the cutters on the lock's shackle and squeezed. The hardened steel blades bit into the metal. I adjusted my grip and squeezed harder. There was a moment of resistance, then a satisfying snap as the shackle gave way. The lock fell to the ground with a metallic clang. I pulled the gate open, drove my truck through, and then closed the gate behind me. I left the broken lock hanging on the chain, a clear message that I wasn't going to be bullied. The whole operation took less than 5 minutes. For the first time in 3 days, I made it to work on time. I knew there would be consequences. I just didn't expect them to come so quickly. By noon, my phone was ringing. Patricia. "Mr. Reeves, I'm standing at the gate right now. Did you damage HOA property?" "I removed an illegal obstruction from my deeded easement. That's not HOA property, Patricia. That's my property." "You destroyed a $3,000 gate." "The gate is fine. I cut the lock. And if you put another one on there, I'll cut that one too." I could hear her breathing heavily on the other end. "This is vandalism. I'm calling the police." "Go ahead. While you're at it, explain to them why you illegally blocked access to private property. I'm sure they'll be very interested." She hung up without another word. I went back to work, but I couldn't concentrate. Part of me felt triumphant. Part of me wondered if I'd just made everything worse. That evening, as I pulled up to the gate on my way home, I saw that someone had replaced the lock. This one was even bigger than the first, some kind of heavy-duty commercial padlock. I smiled, grabbed my bolt cutters, and made short work of it. Snap. Done. This became our routine for the next week. Every morning, Patricia, or someone from the HOA, would replace the lock. Every morning or evening, I'd cut it off. I started keeping the bolt cutters in my front seat for easy access. Greg and the other two easement owners, Thomas Blackwell and Yolanda Foster, started using the gate too once they saw I'd opened it. We had an unspoken agreement. Nobody mentioned the cut locks, and we all enjoyed our rightful access to our properties. On day 8 of the lock-cutting war, I came home to find a Charlotte-Mecklenburg police cruiser parked in my driveway. My stomach dropped. 2 officers were waiting for me, a young guy who looked fresh out of the academy and an older woman with sergeant stripes. "Brandon Reeves?" the sergeant asked. "That's me. I'm Sergeant Linda Morrison. We received a complaint about property destruction. Patricia Hendricks claims you've been vandalizing HOA property." I took a deep breath. "Officers, I'd be happy to explain. Can we talk inside?" We went into my house, and I spread out all my documents on the kitchen table. My deed with the easement clearly marked, the HOA bylaws, photos of the gate, a timeline of events. The sergeant examined everything carefully while the younger officer took notes. "So let me make sure I understand," Sergeant Morrison said. "This easement is deeded to you and provides legal access to your property?" "Yes, madam. It's been in use for over 20 years since this subdivision was built. The HOA just decided 3 weeks ago to block it." "And you've been cutting the locks they put on the gate?" "Yes. My lawyer says the gate itself is illegal. I'm not destroying property. I'm removing an unlawful obstruction." She nodded slowly. "Have you filed anything with the courts?" "We filed an emergency injunction. The hearing is scheduled for next Monday." Sergeant Morrison closed her notebook. "Mr. Reeves, I'm not going to arrest you. This is clearly a civil matter, not a criminal one. However, I'd advise you to let the courts handle it from here. I understand you're frustrated, but continuing to cut the locks could complicate your legal case." "So what am I supposed to do? Just accept being blocked from my property?" "I'm saying wait for the judge to rule. It's only a few more days." She handed me her card. "If the HOA tries to escalate this before your hearing, call me directly. I'll make sure they understand this isn't a criminal matter." After the officers left, I sat at my kitchen table feeling drained. I knew Sergeant Morrison was right. I needed to let the legal system work. But those few more days felt like an eternity. I called Robert and told him about the police visit. He was relieved they hadn't arrested me, but echoed the sergeant's advice. "No more bolt cutters, Brandon. We're almost at the finish line. Don't give Patricia any ammunition to use against you in court." That weekend was torture. Patricia had installed yet another lock, this one with a sign that read, "No trespassing violators will be prosecuted." I had to take the long route all weekend, adding an extra hour to my day every time I left the house. On Monday morning, I put on my best suit and met Robert at the Mecklenburg County Courthouse. The hearing was scheduled for 10 o'clock. Patricia showed up with her own lawyer, a slick-looking guy in an expensive suit named Marcus Webb. She'd also brought 2 other HOA board members for moral support, a nervous-looking man named Gerald Foster and a stern woman named Virginia Marks. We filed into the courtroom, and I felt my heart pounding. I'd never been involved in legal proceedings before, and the whole environment was intimidating. The judge, an older black woman named Judge Ramona Taylor, took the bench and reviewed our filings. "All right," she said, looking over her reading glasses at both parties. "This is a hearing on an emergency injunction filed by Brandon Reeves and 3 other plaintiffs regarding an access gate installed by the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Mr. Chen, you represent the plaintiffs?" Robert stood. "Yes, Your Honor." "And Mr. Webb, you're here for the HOA?" "That's correct, Your Honor." "Mr. Chen, make your case." Robert approached the bench and laid out our argument clearly and concisely. He presented copies of our deeds showing the easement, explained how the HOA had blocked our access without warning or legal authority, and documented the hardship it had caused. He showed photos of the gate, the timeline of events, and statements from all 4 property owners about the impact on their daily lives. When he was done, Judge Taylor turned to Marcus Webb. Your response? Webb stood and launched into what I can only describe as a performance. He talked about property values and neighborhood security. He claimed the easement road had become dangerous with excessive speed and traffic. He even suggested that we property owners were somehow abusing our easement rights by using them too frequently. Your Honor, Webb said dramatically, the HOA has not only the right but the duty to protect all residents of Meadowbrook Estates. This gate serves a legitimate security purpose. Judge Taylor looked unimpressed. Mr. Webb, do you have any evidence that these 4 property owners have violated any terms of their easement? Well, no specific violations, but do you have any documentation showing that the easement road has become dangerous? We have complaints from residents about documentary evidence, Mr. Webb, police reports, traffic studies, anything objective. Webb shuffled through his papers. The HOA board's meeting minutes reflect concerns raised by several residents. Concerns aren't evidence. Do you have any legal precedent that allows an HOA to unilaterally block a deeded easement? Webb hesitated. Your Honor, the HOA bylaws give the board authority to manage common areas for the benefit of all residents. Judge Taylor removed her glasses. Mr. Webb, I've reviewed the deed restrictions and the easement language. This is an explicit deeded right-of-way that predates the HOA's current bylaws. The language is unambiguous. These 4 property owners have an irrevocable easement for ingress and egress to their properties. The HOA cannot simply block that access because they've decided it's inconvenient or because they want to exert control. I felt a surge of hope. Judge Taylor continued, furthermore, I'm troubled by the fact that the HOA installed this gate without any notice to the easement holders, without any attempt at negotiation, and without any legitimate legal justification. This appears to be an abuse of authority. Patricia leaned over and whispered urgently to Webb. He nodded and stood again. Your Honor, if I may, the HOA is willing to provide immediate gate access codes to the plaintiffs. We can resolve this matter without— No, Mr. Webb, that's not sufficient. The easement holders shouldn't need permission or access codes to use their own deeded right-of-way. This court grants the emergency injunction. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA is hereby ordered to remove the gate within 48 hours. If they fail to do so, the plaintiffs are authorized to remove it themselves, and the HOA will be responsible for all costs associated with the removal. I nearly jumped out of my seat. Robert put a hand on my arm to keep me calm, but he was grinning. Judge Taylor wasn't finished. Additionally, the HOA is ordered to reimburse the plaintiffs for all reasonable expenses incurred as a result of the illegal gate, including additional transportation costs and legal fees. The parties will submit documentation of expenses within 2 weeks for the court's review. Webb tried one more time. Your Honor, if we could request a stay to— No stay, Mr. Webb. 48 hours. This hearing is adjourned. The gavel came down, and I felt like I could breathe for the first time in weeks. Robert shook my hand and then gathered up his papers. That went about as well as we could have hoped. Judge Taylor saw right through their nonsense. Patricia stormed out of the courtroom without looking at me, her 2 board members trailing behind her like confused ducklings. I thanked Robert profusely and headed home, feeling victorious. The gate was gone by Wednesday afternoon. When I drove by the easement entrance, all that remained were 2 posts in the ground and some disturbed dirt where the gate had been installed. I drove through with a massive smile on my face, taking my normal 5-minute route home. That should have been the end of it. But Patricia Hendricks wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. 2 weeks later, I received another violation notice. This time, my house's exterior paint was supposedly faded and deteriorating, requiring immediate repainting at my expense. I looked at my house. The paint was fine. I'd had it done 3 years ago and it still looked fresh. I called Greg. He'd received a violation notice too, claiming his mailbox was non-conforming. Thomas got one for having unauthorized decorative elements in his yard, which turned out to be a small garden gnome his granddaughter had given him. Yolanda was cited for parking her car on the street overnight, something she'd done for years without issue. It was clear what was happening. Patricia was retaliating against all 4 of us for the court case. She was weaponizing the HOA rules to make our lives miserable. I called Robert again. She's harassing us. This is retaliation. Document everything, Robert said. Don't respond to any of the violations. Let them pile up. We're going to need to take more serious action. Over the next month, the violations kept coming. I received notices about my trash cans being visible from the street, even though they were in the same place they had always been. My front door wreath was seasonal decorations displayed outside the permitted time frame. My garden hose, neatly coiled on a hose reel, was equipment stored in public view. Each violation came with a fine. First $100, then $200, then $500, as they claimed violations were repeated, even though I hadn't changed anything. The fines added up to over $3,000 in just 6 weeks. Greg, Thomas, and Yolanda were getting hit with similar harassment. We started meeting regularly at my house to compare notes and strategize. Thomas, a retired postal worker in his 70s, was particularly stressed. "I can't afford these fines," he said, his hands shaking as he held his stack of violation notices. "I'm on a fixed income. They're threatening to put a lien on my house." Yolanda, a nurse who worked night shifts, looked exhausted. I tried to go to the last HOA meeting to protest this, but Patricia wouldn't let me speak. She said I hadn't followed proper procedures for requesting time on the agenda. "This is harassment," Greg said. He was a software engineer, analytical and normally calm, but even he was starting to crack. "She's abusing her power and we need to stop her." Robert had been working on a strategy. He suggested we file a lawsuit against the HOA and Patricia personally for harassment and abuse of authority. It would be expensive and time-consuming, but we didn't see another option. The four of us agreed to split the legal costs. The lawsuit was filed in December, 3 months after the original gate incident. We sued for harassment, retaliation, abuse of authority, and emotional distress. We asked for all fines to be rescinded and for Patricia to be removed from her position as HOA president. The HOA's response was to call an emergency meeting and vote to increase our dues by $300 per month, claiming they needed additional funds for legal defense and neighborhood improvements. The vote passed because Patricia had stacked the meeting with her supporters, and the four of us didn't have enough votes to stop it. "She's making everyone else pay for her legal battle against us," Yolanda said after we received the dues increase notice. "This is insane." Things got even worse in January. I came home one day to find a notice posted on my door. The HOA was scheduling a compliance inspection of my property. They wanted access to my backyard, my garage, and even the interior of my house to check for code violations. I called Robert immediately. "They can't do this, can they?" "Check your HOA bylaws. Some associations do have inspection rights, but there are usually limits." I pulled up the bylaws and read through them. There was indeed a provision allowing the HOA to inspect properties, but only with reasonable notice and for legitimate purposes related to community safety and standards. This didn't feel legitimate. This felt like Patricia looking for any excuse to fine me. "Can I refuse?" I asked Robert. "You can, but they might claim you're violating the bylaws. Let me send them a letter stating that you'll allow an inspection only if it's conducted by a neutral third party, not by HOA board members, and only for legitimate safety concerns." Robert sent the letter. Patricia's response was to schedule the inspection anyway and show up at my house with Virginia Marks and a man I didn't recognize, carrying clipboards and cameras. I met them at my front door. "I'm not allowing this inspection." Patricia's smile was venomous. "Your lawyer was informed. We have the right to inspect." "Not like this. If you want to inspect my property, it needs to be done by a licensed inspector, not by you with your vendetta. This is a violation of HOA bylaws. You'll be fined $1,000. Fine me. Add it to the pile. But you're not setting foot on my property without a court order." The man with them, who I learned was Virginia's husband Dale, stepped forward. "Sir, we're just trying to maintain community standards." "Community standards? Patricia is harassing me because I beat her in court. Everyone knows it. Now get off my property." They left, but not before Patricia took photos of my house from the street, documenting every tiny imperfection she could find for her next round of violation notices. That evening, I sat down with my laptop and started doing research. I looked up North Carolina HOA laws, court cases, and strategies other homeowners had used to fight abusive HOAs. I found a whole community of people online who dealt with similar situations. Some had won, some had lost, and some had just given up and moved. I wasn't going to give up and move. This was my home. I'd put 8 years of my life into this place. I'd built a deck in the backyard, planted trees, painted every room exactly how I wanted it. Patricia Hendricks wasn't going to drive me out. I discovered something interesting in my research. North Carolina law required HOAs to follow certain procedures for meetings, elections, and rule changes. I started looking at the minutes from the meeting where Patricia had been elected president. Something didn't add up. The bylaws required a quorum of at least 60% of homeowners to be present or represented by proxy for board elections. The minutes showed only 48% participation. Patricia's election might not have been valid. I brought this to Robert, who examined the documents carefully. You might be onto something. If her election was invalid, then all the actions she's taken as president could be challenged. So what do? We amend our lawsuit to challenge her authority. This could invalidate every fine, every violation notice, everything she's done. We filed the amended complaint in February. The response from Patricia and the HOA was immediate and aggressive. They hired a larger law firm, brought in expensive attorneys, and filed motions to dismiss. They claimed the election issue was too old to challenge, that we'd waived our right to object by not bringing it up immediately. Judge Taylor, who was also hearing this case, scheduled a hearing for early March. In the meantime, Patricia escalated her harassment campaign. She started driving by my house multiple times a day, taking photos. She sent letters to my business clients claiming I was involved in legal disputes and suggesting I was unreliable. She even filed a complaint with the North Carolina Licensing Board for general contractors, claiming I'd done unpermitted work on my own house. Every accusation was baseless, but each one required time and energy to defend against. I was spending hours every week dealing with Patricia's attacks instead of running my business. My stress levels were through the roof. I wasn't sleeping well. My blood pressure was up. Greg was having similar problems. His employer received an anonymous complaint claiming he was working from home when he was supposed to be in the office, which wasn't even true. He had a hybrid schedule that his company was fully aware of. Yolanda found her tires slashed one morning. Thomas's mailbox was knocked over twice in 1 month. We couldn't prove Patricia was behind all of it, but the timing was too coincidental. The March hearing was intense. Both sides brought extensive documentation. Robert presented evidence of the invalid election, the harassment campaign, the retaliatory fines, and the abuse of authority. He had records of everything: emails, letters, violation notices, photos, timelines. He'd even found several other homeowners in the neighborhood who were willing to testify that Patricia had been harassing them too, though they weren't part of the easement dispute. One of these homeowners, a woman named Michelle Torres, testified that Patricia had fined her $5,000 for having the wrong shade of beige paint on her house. She brought out a color chart and measured it against my house, Michelle said. My paint was approved when I applied it 2 years ago, but she said the rules had changed. When I asked to see the new rules, she couldn't provide them. Another homeowner, David Kim, testified that Patricia had tried to fine him for having solar panels on his roof, even though North Carolina law specifically prohibited HOAs from banning solar installations. She said the panels were unsightly and violated community aesthetics. When I showed her the state law, she said the HOA rules took precedence. The picture that emerged was damning. Patricia hadn't just targeted us 4 easement holders. She'd been terrorizing the entire neighborhood, using her position to bully anyone who disagreed with her or anyone she simply didn't like. The HOA's attorneys tried to defend her actions, claiming she was just enforcing the rules strictly. But under cross-examination, they couldn't explain the invalid election, the selective enforcement, the retaliatory timing of the violations, or the harassment of my business. Judge Taylor took 2 weeks to issue her ruling. When it came, it was comprehensive and devastating to Patricia. First, the judge ruled that Patricia's election as HOA president had indeed been invalid due to the lack of a proper quorum. All actions she'd taken as president were therefore null and void. Every fine she'd issued was rescinded. Every violation notice was invalidated. Every rule change she'd tried to implement was reversed. Second, the judge found that Patricia and the HOA board had engaged in a pattern of harassment and retaliation against the four of us. She ordered the HOA to pay our legal fees, which by that point totaled over $40,000. She also ordered the HOA to pay each of us $10,000 in damages for emotional distress. Third, and most satisfying, Judge Taylor permanently barred Patricia Hendricks from serving in any leadership position in the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. She would still live in the neighborhood, but she could never again wield power over her neighbors. The ruling came down on March 28th. I got the call from Robert while I was on a job site, and I actually had to sit down on a stack of lumber to absorb the news. "We won," Robert said. "Complete victory. Everything you wanted and more." I thanked him, hung up, and just sat there for a minute, feeling the weight of 4 months of stress lifting off my shoulders. My crew kept working around me, probably wondering why their boss was sitting there grinning like an idiot. That evening, I called Greg, Thomas, and Yolanda. We decided to meet for dinner to celebrate. We went to a steakhouse in downtown Charlotte, ordered expensive bottles of wine, and toasted to justice. Thomas looked healthier than he had in months. Yolanda was actually smiling. Greg was already talking about running for the HOA board himself to make sure someone reasonable was in charge. "We should have fought back sooner," Yolanda said. "We let her get away with too much before we finally stood up." "I think we fought back at exactly the right time," I said. "We tried the legal route first. When that didn't work, we escalated. We documented everything. We built an airtight case. If we'd just gotten angry and confrontational from the beginning, it might not have worked out this well." "Still," Greg said, "I can't believe it took a judge to stop her. Where were the other board members? Why didn't they stand up to her?" "Fear," Thomas said quietly. "Patricia was a bully, and bullies are good at making people afraid. Gerald and Virginia went along with her because they were scared of becoming her next targets." We finished our dinner and headed home. As I drove back to Meadowbrook Estates, taking my normal route through the easement, I felt genuinely peaceful for the first time in months. But the story wasn't quite over yet. 3 days after Judge Taylor's ruling, I came home to find Patricia standing in my driveway again. My initial reaction was anger. What could she possibly want now? But as I got closer, I realized she looked different, smaller somehow, defeated. "Brandon," she said, her voice lacking its usual aggressive edge, "can we talk?" I considered telling her to leave, but curiosity got the better of me. "You've got 5 minutes." She took a deep breath. "I wanted to apologize for everything. The gate, the fines, the harassment, all of it." I crossed my arms. "You're apologizing now, after you lost in court?" "I'm apologizing because I was wrong. I let the power go to my head. When I became HOA president, I thought I was making the neighborhood better. I thought I was protecting property values and maintaining standards, but somewhere along the way, it became about control, about making people do what I wanted. You targeted me and my neighbors. You tried to ruin my business. You made Thomas worry he'd lose his house. I know, and I'm sorry. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just wanted you to know that I realized what I did was wrong." I studied her face. She looked sincere, but I'd been fooled before. "Why should I believe this isn't just another manipulation?" "You shouldn't. You have no reason to trust me. But I needed to say it anyway, for my own conscience if nothing else." She turned to leave, then paused. "For what it's worth, you were right about the easement, and you were right to fight back. Someone needed to stand up to me." She walked away, got into her white Lexus, and drove off. I stood there processing the conversation. Part of me appreciated the apology. Part of me thought it was too little, too late. But mostly, I just felt tired of the whole situation. The next week, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA held an emergency election to replace the invalidated board. Greg ran for president and won easily. Michelle Torres and David Kim also joined the board. Their first action was to repeal most of Patricia's rules changes and return the HOA to its previous, more reasonable standards. Their second action was to refund the $300 monthly dues increase Patricia had implemented. Checks went out to every homeowner in the neighborhood. Their third action was to formally apologize to me, Greg, Thomas, and Yolanda on behalf of the HOA. It wasn't legally necessary. Judge Taylor's ruling had already settled everything, but it was appreciated nonetheless. Life slowly returned to normal. I focused on my business, which had suffered during the months of legal battles. I reconnected with clients I'd neglected and bid on new projects. Spring arrived, bringing warm weather and blooming flowers. I mowed my lawn regularly, not because I was worried about violations, but because I actually enjoyed having a nice yard. Patricia kept a low profile. I'd see her occasionally driving through the neighborhood or getting her mail, but we didn't interact. She'd resigned from all HOA committees and activities. Some neighbors shunned her, others were more forgiving. I fell somewhere in the middle. I didn't forgive what she'd done, but I also didn't feel the need to punish her further. In May, about a year after the whole mess started, I was working in my garage when Greg stopped by with news. "Patricia's moving," he said. "Her house just went on the market." "Really? Where's she going?" "Don't know, but she told one of the neighbors she needs a fresh start somewhere else." I thought about that. In a way, I understood. Patricia had made herself a pariah in Meadowbrook Estates. Every time she left her house, she was confronted with the community she'd tried to control and failed. Moving probably was the best option for her. Her house sold quickly, and by July she was gone. I never saw her again. The story could end there, but there's one more chapter that needs to be told. In August, the new HOA board approached me with a request. The old access road through the easement was in bad shape, full of potholes and cracked pavement. The HOA wanted to repave it, not to control it, but to improve it for everyone's benefit. They asked if I and the other easement holders would approve the work. We met to discuss it. Thomas pointed out that better pavement would help his aging car. Yolanda liked the idea of fewer bumps on her drive home after long hospital shifts. Greg thought it would improve property values for all of us, and I appreciated that the new board was actually asking for our input instead of just doing whatever they wanted. We agreed, with one condition. We wanted it in writing that the repaving didn't give the HOA any additional rights over the easement. Greg, in his role as HOA president, immediately agreed and had the HOA attorney draft an amendment to the bylaws making it explicit that the easement belonged to the 4 property owners and that the HOA's role was purely to help maintain it with our permission. The repaving happened in September. It was done professionally with proper drainage and line striping. The road looked better than it ever had. For the first time since moving to Meadowbrook Estates, I felt like the HOA was actually working for the residents instead of against them. One evening in early October, I was driving home through the newly paved easement when I realized something. The gate Patricia had installed had been up for less than 3 weeks before I cut the locks and started the fight. That 3 weeks of inconvenience had led to 4 months of legal battles, thousands of dollars in fees, and enough stress to take years off my life. But it had been worth it, not just because I'd won, but because standing up to Patricia had freed the entire neighborhood from her tyranny. Michelle Torres no longer had to worry about paint colors. David Kim could keep his solar panels. Thomas could display his garden gnome without fear. And dozens of other homeowners could live their lives without a petty dictator controlling their every move. Sometimes you have to fight. Sometimes you can't just go along to get along. Sometimes you need to grab the bolt cutters and take care of the problem yourself, then let the legal system clean up the mess afterward. Would I do it differently if I could go back? Probably not. Maybe I would have documented everything even more thoroughly from the beginning. Maybe I would have gotten all 4 easement holders together for a united front before the first lock was cut. But the fundamental decision to fight back, to refuse to be bullied, to stand up for my rights, that was correct. As I pulled into my driveway that October evening, I saw my neighbors out in their yards. Greg was playing basketball with his kids. Thomas was watering his flowers, that garden gnome standing proudly by his mailbox. Yolanda was sitting on her porch enjoying a rare evening off from work. They waved and I waved back. This was my neighborhood, my community, my home, and it was going to stay that way. The bolt cutters are still in my garage hanging on their hook next to my other tools. I haven't needed them since those 3 weeks in September, but I keep them sharp and ready just in case. Because you never know when someone might try to put up another gate where it doesn't belong. Looking back now, months after everything settled, I realized the whole experience taught me something important about standing up for yourself. It's not just about winning or losing. It's not even really about the gate or the easement or the HOA rules. It's about drawing a line and saying this far and no further. Patricia Hendricks spent months trying to make me back down, to accept her authority, to submit to her control. She escalated and escalated, thinking that if she just made things difficult enough, I'd give up. But she fundamentally misunderstood who she was dealing with. I built things for a living. I solved problems. I didn't quit when construction projects got complicated, and I wasn't going to quit when a power-hungry HOA president made my life difficult. The legal fees were substantial, even with the court-ordered reimbursement. The stress affected my health and my business. There were days when I wondered if it was all worth it, if I should just pay the fines and move somewhere else. But I'm glad I didn't. Because this was never really about money or convenience. It was about principle. I had a legal right to that easement. It was in my deed, black and white, recorded with the county. Patricia didn't have the authority to take that away, no matter what position she held in the HOA. And when she tried to take it anyway, I had every right to remove her illegal obstruction. The bolt cutters were just a tool. They were a physical manifestation of my refusal to be bullied. Every time I cut one of those locks, I was making a statement. You don't control me, you don't own me, and you can't block me from my own property. Some people criticized my approach. After the story got around the neighborhood, a few residents told me I should have been more patient, that I should have waited for the legal system from the very beginning instead of taking matters into my own hands. But I think they missed the point. The legal system is important, and I used it. But the legal system is slow, and in the meantime, real people are suffering real consequences. Sometimes you need to take immediate action to stop the harm, and then let the lawyers sort out the details afterward. Judge Taylor understood that. Her ruling didn't criticize me for cutting the locks. Instead, she criticized Patricia for putting them there in the first place. The judge recognized that I'd been defending my rights, not violating anyone else's. In the end, justice prevailed. Patricia was removed from power. The illegal fines were rescinded. We were compensated for our troubles. The neighborhood got new, reasonable leadership. And that gate never went back up. I drive through the easement every day now, usually without even thinking about it. It's just my normal route home, the way it was always supposed to be. But occasionally, when I turn onto that access road, I remember those 3 weeks when it was blocked. I remember the frustration, the anger, the feeling of powerlessness. And then I remember the satisfying snap of those bolt cutters, the look on Patricia's face when she lost in court, and the sense of victory when it was all over. My property value didn't suffer from the legal battle. In fact, thanks to Greg's leadership as the new HOA president, property values in Meadowbrook Estates have been rising steadily. Turns out people prefer to live in neighborhoods where the HOA works with residents instead of against them. Who knew? My business recovered quickly once I wasn't spending all my time dealing with HOA harassment. I landed several major contracts in the months after the lawsuit ended, including a commercial renovation project that significantly increased my company's profile. I hired 2 new employees and bought a second truck. Reeves Contracting was doing better than ever. Thomas told me recently that the whole experience had given him a new lease on life. I was ready to just accept whatever Patricia said, he admitted. I'm old, I'm on a fixed income, I don't have the energy to fight. But watching you stand up to her inspired me. It reminded me that age doesn't mean you have to be a doormat. Yolanda said something similar. I deal with difficult people at the hospital every day. Patients who are demanding, families who are unreasonable. I'm trained to stay calm and professional. But there's a difference between being professional and being a victim. You showed me that difference. Greg, ever the analytical one, did a whole cost-benefit analysis of the situation. From a purely financial perspective, the lawsuit cost us time and money in the short term, but saved us much more in the long term. If Patricia had stayed in power, she would have extracted tens of thousands of dollars in illegitimate fines from the neighborhood over the years. The $40,000 we spent on legal fees was actually an investment that paid massive dividends. I appreciated everyone's perspectives, But for me, it was never really about the money or even about the principle in some abstract sense. It was about being able to live my life without someone else's arbitrary rules making everything harder. It was about freedom. The gate incident happened because Patricia couldn't stand the idea of people in her neighborhood having independence from her authority. The easement represented a route that she didn't control, a path that didn't go through her approval. That drove her crazy, so she blocked it. But you can't block people's legal rights just because you don't like them. That's not how America works. That's not how property law works, and that's not how decent human beings treat each other. I still see some of Patricia's former supporters occasionally. Gerald Foster, the nervous board member who went along with everything she said, apologized to me at the grocery store one day. I was afraid of her, he admitted. She was so intense, so convinced she was right about everything. It was easier to just agree. I understood that. Bullies are good at making people afraid. They create an environment where it feels safer to comply than to resist. Patricia had done exactly that with the HOA, turning board meetings into sessions where everyone was afraid to disagree with her. But fear-based leadership never lasts. Eventually, someone refuses to be afraid. Someone stands up. Someone grabs the bolt cutters. The neighborhood is different now, better. There's a sense of community that didn't exist before. People look out for each other. When someone has a problem with the HOA, instead of suffering in silence, they bring it to the board and it gets discussed openly. Greg instituted a policy of transparency, publishing all board meeting minutes online and encouraging resident participation. Ironically, Patricia's reign of terror had one positive effect. It brought the rest of us together. Me, Greg, Thomas, Yolanda, we became friends through adversity. We still get together regularly, usually for dinner or backyard barbecues. We laugh about the whole situation now, though it wasn't funny at the time. Remember when she tried to find me for my mailbox? Greg chuckles. Remember when she wanted to inspect the inside of my house? I add. Remember when she measured my paint color? Michelle Torres joins in when she's at one of these gatherings. We can laugh because we won. Because justice prevailed. Because the bully was defeated and the neighborhood was saved. There's a lesson in all of this, I think, about institutional power and individual rights. HOAs serve a purpose. They maintain common areas, enforce reasonable standards, and protect property values. But they can also become vehicles for petty tyrants who enjoy exercising power over their neighbors. The key is oversight, accountability, and the willingness of residents to push back when things go wrong. I never wanted to be the guy who fought the HOA. I just wanted to drive home from work, do my job, live my life. But sometimes you don't get to choose your battles. Sometimes the battles choose you, and when they do, you can either fight or surrender. I'm glad I fought. I'm glad I cut those locks. I'm glad I hired Robert Chen and went to court and stood up for my rights and the rights of my neighbors. It cost me time, money, and peace of mind in the short term, but in the long term, it was absolutely worth it. The easement is still there, open and accessible. The gate is long gone, probably rusting in some junkyard somewhere. Patricia is gone too, off to terrorize some other neighborhood or maybe hopefully having learned her lesson. And I'm still here, living in my house, running my business, enjoying my life. Every once in a while, when I drive through that easement, I think about those 3 weeks when it was blocked. I think about standing there with the bolt cutters, deciding whether to cut that first lock. It seemed like such a big decision at the time. Would I get arrested? Would I make everything worse? Was I doing the right thing? But it wasn't really a big decision at all. It was the simplest decision in the world. Someone had put an illegal obstruction in my way. I had the right to remove it. So I did. The bolt cutters are still in my garage, hanging on their hook, ready for the next time someone tries to put up a gate where it doesn't belong. I hope I never need them again. But if I do, I won't hesitate. Because sometimes the best way to deal with a locked gate is to grab the bolt cutters and fix that problem within an hour. Then let the lawyers handle the rest. And that's the story of how I defeated an abusive HOA president, protected my property rights, and helped free an entire neighborhood from tyranny, one cut lock at a time.